This is Dr. R. We're looking at an epidemiologic question that's really going to be focusing in on the scientific method. So let's dive right in. First off, if we look at the lead-in, it's telling me that I'm definitely going to need to go back and read the question stem. But what I like to do is to take a look at the answer options. So to demonstrate the superiority of the researcher's method over other methods, so this is looking at what the researcher is actually doing in their design, their research design, and the methods that they're using, and then we're studying what other methods might have been done, like there might be best practices. So that's what that one's telling me. To determine the causal relationship between income level and happiness. So there's a very interesting word here, causal. This is going to point to very specific things when we start talking about proving or we start talking about causal relationships. We're really going to be looking at things like a randomized controlled trial when we start talking about causal relationships. They have to be experimental designs. Cohort studies is not going to really get into causality. It's going to be randomization of different groups in order to be able to do that, but that's what that one's talking about. And then to establish a correlation. So a correlation is just really a relationship between age and happiness. So that's what I'm going to be looking at there, is really to talk about a correlation. Here, again, we use the word prove. So prove is a lot like causality, and so then that's going to be looking more towards a randomized controlled trial, and then they're going to be looking at things like age, gender, marital status, and income level. And then to test a hypothesis about the factors that influence happiness. So this would be some kind of a test. And we're going to have to understand what a hypothesis is. So a hypothesis can come from the research question, and then we can end up with H0 or the null hypothesis and HA, which is the alternative hypothesis, right? So a researcher is interested in understanding the factors that influence people's happiness. So understanding the factors that influence people's happiness. To investigate this question, she decides to conduct a study. It doesn't say what kind of study, but it does say a study, so we're going to have to look out for what kind. She randomly selects participants, so that's important, and asks them to rate their happiness level. So this is going to be looking at their happiness on a scale of 1 to 10. This is most likely going to be some kind of a survey tool, as well as to provide information about their age, gender, marital status, and income level. So this is what we often call demographic data. After collecting the data, she uses statistical methods to analyze the results and draw conclusions. So when I go back here, are we talking about a superior method over another method? I think that one we can pretty much eliminate right off because we're not mentioning another method at all. So that one's kind of a misnomer. We can remove it. Are we talking about a randomized controlled trial here? I don't hear anything about them creating two separate groups. What I really hear is them asking them just randomly selects one group of people and then has them do a survey. And then from that survey, they then collect demographic data, right? So things about age, gender, marital status, and income level. So I don't really feel like there is a discussion about a randomized controlled trial here. And is it really trying to prove the causal relationship between something like income level and happiness? I mean, it could, but there's also these other factors that are in there. So I don't think that one is very likely. So I'm going to put a question mark for that one. to establish a correlation between age and happiness. That's possible. We could have a relationship kind of question here, but there's more here. What about gender and happiness, or marital status and happiness? That's a good question. So I think this one doesn't give enough. I would rule this one out. That one doesn't seem very likely. And then once again, we're back here to prove, which is really a randomized controlled trial type situation. It does throw us off by looking at using all of the factors here and happiness. But really, if we're going to try to prove something, we're going to talk about the causal relationship. And so randomized controlled trial, I can remove that one. So this one seems a little awkward, but I actually think it's probably the most correct to test a hypothesis about the factors that influence happiness. And these are some of the factors that potentially can influence happiness. Now, it didn't really talk about a hypothesis, but you can imagine that since the researcher is interested in understanding the factors that influence people's happiness, they could write a hypothesis about this, or that the underlying sense is that there would be a hypothesis. And the null hypothesis would be that these factors have no influence on happiness. And then the HA would be that these factors do have an influence on happiness. So when I go back to looking at B and C, which was a question mark, actually, I'm sorry. B was crossed out because of the randomized controlled trial. But C, to establish a correlation, I do agree that this is one of the things that can be done in this study, but it's only talking about age, and there's other factors that are actually influencing this. So I believe that this one is less likely than this one to be correct, and that this one is the most likely correct. Remember, what we're trying to do is get our skills up for exam test taking when we get ready for step exams. And step exams are most likely correct, or the most correct. All right.